Hi, my name's Angela Casey and welcome to Edinburgh Outdoors, the podcast that explores Edinburgh outdoor spaces and the people in them. And today I'm standing on top of Calton Hill. I'm looking at the buildings and it's a lovely sunny day, but it's very windy, so you're going to get some wind in the background, but there are also some beautiful views and we can see the crags and we're looking across the Forth. And for those that are listening from abroad, Calton Hill is at the east end of Princes Street, and so there are fabulous views down Princes Street too. And I'm here today with Chair of the Calton Hill Conservation Trust, Simon Holledge.
Thank you very much.
Hello, Simon, and welcome to Edinburgh Outdoors.
Good, thank you.
So, you're Chair of the Conservation Trust.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Well, I suppose it goes back, the sort of recent history goes back to 2017 when there was a management plan written for the hill. And one of the recommendations of the management plan was to engage the community so that the community would have a role in the management and looking after the hill. And nothing really happened, but after the pandemic, we had a Zoom conference with the community council involved, and we discussed setting up a friends group. And then in 2023, we formed an action group, then it became a friends group, and then it turned into a conservation trust registered as a charity with the Scottish Charity Register.
And how did you get involved?
It really started off with people who were involved in the local residents association. So the first people involved in what was then the action group, then the friends group, the first people who were involved were people who lived very close to the hill. And then since then we've been gradually sort of moving outwards and we have more and more members.
Right. Some people live on the hill, don't they? There are some houses on the side of the hill, aren't there?
There are some 18th century houses, and actually some of our original committee were living in those houses. They're probably the earliest ones. One of Robert Burns' loves was lived in there. The Clarinda was in one of those houses.
Robert Burns' loves seem to live in most places.
Yes, yes.
And what kind of things have you been working on? What is it you've been doing recently?
Basically the hill has been through a period of neglect going back to the sort of mid-2000s, which has particularly involved erosion on the hill, the erosion of the area in front of the National Monument, with other problems, a blockage of drainage systems, big litter problems, and so forth. And we actually had graffiti on the National Monument in 2022, which was the lowest point. If things got worse from 2008 onwards, they were at their worst in 2022 when we also had the bin strike, and so we had huge litter problems.
And you've got wind up here, so I guess it just
The wind is a big problem because it blows the litter into places which are very difficult to access.
I used to live on the side of this hill, and I've only just noticed that there's a trig point.
The trig point, of course, isn't the highest point, and people get a bit confused about that, but the high point is, in fact, the Nelson Monument.
What have been your most recent projects then? So 2022 was a low point. And since then, what have you been working on? What's been happening?
We now got to the point with almost zero graffiti. We have regular litter pickups, and we're working on a more systematic approach to the problem of waste management on the hill. So that's one thing. We've also been dealing with erosion, and we've regrassed. We did a trial regrassing, returfing of 4 areas, of which this is one. This was returfed in February.
You could have a bit of meadow going on, couldn't you?
Yes, we've talked about that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we've got the regrassing, the litter. We've also been digging out all the rainwater runoff channels and also unblocking the drains. So we're hoping that we're going to have a working drainage system soon. And that's important. It's related to erosion, obviously, but it's also related to the state of the paths. Once we get the rainwater runoff channels free, we can then look at the resurfacing of the paths, and a lot of the paths are in poor surface.
So a lot of the paths tarmac, but also some of them are just
Some of them are not
gravelly,
tarmac.
worn stuff.
And
are they?
this is a main one, but down
Yeah.
here there are main ones which are now washed out, actively washed out. So the gravel is washed away, the earth is washed away, and the
Yeah.
surfacing is all gone. And this is important because what we want in the future is to have disabled access, and to have disabled access, we need to have good, smooth surfaces.
Is there disabled access at the moment? Can someone in a wheelchair,
not-
unless they come in a car?
Well, they can come up in a car. They could come up the road, but
Yeah.
it would be difficult. And the problem at the moment is that this is a big issue for us, is that the traffic can go in both directions, and there is really very little space for pedestrians. And I've never seen a wheelchair go up the road. I think it's a bit too challenging
Yeah.
at the moment.
I can imagine. Now, one of the things you've been working on is a survey of the vegetation, is that right?
Yes, we have a grant for this. We have a grant to make a biodiversity management plan. And this is quite important because the 2017 management plan is a wonderful document. It covers almost everything, but not nature. So that the biodiversity management plan we're working on will complement that 2017 one. And we have a grant from Inspiring Scotland, who have a scheme called the Neighbourhood Ecosystem Fund, and so they're funding that.
And I was looking at it online, and it said there was woodland.
The hill is 10.5 hectares in
Right.
size. We have 1 hectare down here, which is very densely vegetated, lots of trees.
Oh, you
And
sort of used to see it from Piccadilly Place before they built
Yes.
the Omni, didn't you?
Well, you can see it from the back of the Omni Centre. You get a very
Right.
good view of it.
We're looking down over the Edinburgh Playhouse. We can see it from the back, and we can see down to the church on the corner of Broughton Street. And in fact, I'm now seeing that we can see the bridges from here.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yes, we're
So
a
there's-
very good view today. Yeah.
So is that managed woodland?
It's been benignly neglected. Everything on the hill is neglected, but the
Right.
neglect in some ways is good. And for that area down there, the 1 hectare of woodland, it's been very good. It's a very steep slope, so it's difficult to access.
And you've also done a mammal survey, is that right?
We're just beginning. We've done the vegetation, and the mammals we're thinking are actually down there
Yeah.
in the woodland area.
You must have foxes.
We're hoping we might have badgers. I've seen a stoat up here, weasels, mice, probably a lot of bats.
So one of the talks that I did in East Craig Lockhart Hill,
Oh, yes.
and they did a bat walk. There's a guy who came out and did a bat walk, and he's got one of these things where you can hear the bats.
Yes, I have as well. I've done bat surveys before. People get hooked on bats very
Yeah.
easily because they're fascinating. They're not flying mice, which
So what
some
people
people-
think they are.
yeah, they live up to the age of about 30. In the summer, they're in the trees, but in the winter, they will then go for more protected places.
So your key projects for the organisation currently.
Okay, there are lots of ones. You've seen there's a notice board here.
Oh yeah.
There are about a dozen. Yeah, this one is probably not in such bad condition, but there are about a dozen info boards, and people read them, but they're all in terrible condition. Some of them are actually fading away. This is in better condition than some of them. They must have been done a dozen or 15 years ago. So one of our projects is to apply for funds to renew all of these. So there's that. We have some potentially very expensive stone repairs that have to be done. So, for example, over there is something called the Regent Walk, and there is a long stone wall facing down towards Regent Road, which is coming away at the base. The whole thing is coming away at the base. So this could be very expensive repair to do, but if we don't do it, then sooner or later it falls over.
Should we walk round a little bit and look at
Right.
some of the stuff? Because
Right.
it's an interesting hill, isn't it? Because it's got all these different monuments on it.
Yes, I mean what I always say is that Calton Hill is a well-loved site, but it's loved for lots of different reasons by different people. So some people are interested in the monuments and the sort of Greek revival thing. Other people are interested in nature, they're interested in the views, obviously, but they're also the sort of symbols of unionism, symbols of Scottish identity.
What's interesting about it is you can't see everything from all of it. You can't go to one point and see everything. You have to walk round it to get the different views. So if you stand here, we're in front of the monument. If we stand here, we can see the castle, and over there you get great views of the crowds.
Yes, yeah.
So this is obviously an incredibly famous bit of Edinburgh skyline architecture, which is known as Edinburgh's shame. Is that right?
I personally don't like that. In the history of Edinburgh, almost everything which was ever started ran out of funds. In most cases, people would start off with grand ideas and then it'd be left half finished. Most of the other projects were eventually finished, but not this one. I think it could still be finished.
I rather like it as it is. I've always loved it because it stands out so much on the scale.
I mean, this is just my personal opinion. I mean, you're not going to finish it in stone, obviously, but with technology you could do it in light.
Yeah, you could. I mean, it was a very grand idea that somebody had, wasn't it? That they were going to do it. It does seem a bit ambitious.
Well, you know that with the Greek revival time, there were people who were claiming that Edinburgh and Leith was an exact facsimile of Athens and Piraeus. So this is going to be the Acropolis. And some people objected, well, it's not quite the same as, then other people were saying, actually, it's better. This is the Edinburgh and Leith is actually better than Athens and Piraeus. So putting the Parthenon up was part of this grand scheme.
It does look amazing. I like it.
There was one done in Regensburg in Bavaria, and they finished. The Germans finished their one.
Germans would finish, wouldn't they? Yeah, always organised.
Aesthetically, I think as it is quite beautiful.
And it's very distinctive. And when you're down Princes Street and you look back up, you see it from everywhere, don't you? And Nelson's monument. That's in honour of Nelson, is it?
It's in honour of Nelson. 1816. There was a competition. This design won it. And then afterwards, a lot of people didn't like it and they wanted it demolished.
That's classically Edinburgh, I must say.
Well, it's part of the castellated style. You know, originally the jail, which was down there, was a sort of castle thing. And over there we have the Gothic tower, which is also castellated. So it sort of went with this non-Greek revival side of the hill.
Is it meant to look like a telescope?
That's what people always say. I don't know whether it was done by William Byrne. I don't know whether he intended that or not. But it did have the black ball on top of it, which is now missing. The council are repairing it.
Okay. Which is your favourite bit of the hill?
Oh, I like the National Monument. I mean, the City Observatory is beautiful. It's beautiful inside. We've also had meetings sometimes in the City Dome, which is fun. Have you ever been in the City Dome?
I have been in there, and I'm just wondering about the acoustics of having a meeting. Because it must all... It goes up into the middle or it goes around the sides, doesn't it?
But also the western part with all the trees we were talking about, that's also definitely one of my favourite parts of the hill. It must be the wildest piece of land in the city centre, so I think that's great as well.
I think it's fantastic to have something like that in the middle of the city. Well, it's also, I mean, what a great city we have, because I keep going and meeting people and we're up on hills, but we're in the city. It's wonderful. It's really good.
Yes.
It's very nice. And that view of the crags and everything is fantastic, isn't it? So you had Angus Miller here the other day. I was over there with him looking at the Hutton section and talking about James Hutton.
Yes.
And he came and told you, and that's when you find out Calton Hill is a split-off bit of Arthur's Seat.
Yep.
Which is quite interesting, isn't
Angus Miller's favourite rock is here. There's, on the other side, there is a rock which is sort of absolutely polished, smooth and shiny from the last glaciation. So he always comes and does a talk with the rock.
There are a lot of people up here on the hill now. Do you know what kind of visitors you get? How many?
Well, we know that 350,000 people go to the collective gallery, so they have that statistic, but that's the only one we have. So I don't know whether the total for the hill as a whole would be double that or perhaps even more.
Yeah, I am quite surprised by how many people are up here today.
Well, I mean, we always say that Calton Hill gives you the maximum reward for the least effort, whereas at the other seat you have to invest in a lot more time and effort to
yes,
get
you
up
do a
there.
bit. And tell me about your volunteers. How many you've got?
Well, obviously, we are very keen to have members. We've now got over 100. When we started, we talked to the Water of Leith Conservation Trust, who are a kind of model for us, and they suggested that having a separate volunteers organisation, and the volunteers, unlike the members, wouldn't have to pay an annual fee. So we are developing that idea. The other thing is that with the volunteers, we're looking for people who are relatively fit and agile, because we have so many slopes here. So whereas the members would probably be quite happy litter picking at the top, then there are some actually quite steep and difficult bits to go, and then we're working with the volunteers and the more difficult stuff there.
And how many do you think you've got at the moment who've been volunteering?
Not nearly enough. But the thing is that what we have been able to do is work with other organisations who've sent us corporate volunteers. We've had the Edinburgh University Library, we had the Scottish Government, we had a group of executives from a cleaning company in the south of England who turned up, and various other groups. So we've been able to draw on these corporate groups.
Yeah.
But we prefer to have more of our own direct volunteers. But there's no shortage of work to be done here. There's a huge amount.
And is there a social element to it, do you think, if people come and volunteer?
Yes, I think so. Particularly because we've done lots of walks. So we've done history, geology, nature walks. So there is a sort of social element with that. And we may do more of that in the future.
People like to find out about somewhere, don't they? And I can imagine that being a member and then being able to come to that kind of thing is a really nice thing to do.
Yes.
Find out more about your own city.
Yes.
So if somebody wanted to find out more and volunteer, how would they find out about that?
Well, we've got a website. We have got a presence on Twitter, which is diminishing now. We're moving towards Blue Sky.
I'll put a link so that people will be able to click through and find it.
Yes.
And you're saying you have events, and you also had a litter picking, didn't you, recently?
Yes,
right.
our last litter pick. There was a huge amount of stuff over there.
I was quite interested in the plants that were found here, actually.
Okay, our botanist made a list of 9 plants that he thought were particularly significant, but probably people would be most interested in the harebells. The harebells which were found just over here. So we've got an area of harebells which we hope to protect in the future.
And you've got gorse. Is that gorse or is that broom?
Gorse and broom, both.
I'm forgetting that, of course, there's Regent Garden, which is the private garden over the back, isn't it?
That's also kind of part of the personality of the hill, because the division goes back into many centuries between the two, because the Regent Gardens belonged to the Heriot Hospital, George Heriot Hospital, and this became a public park in 1725, I think. But the division is older than that. So they have a very different atmosphere between the two.
Do you know about the cannon?
There is an info board. See what the state of the info board.
So the Portuguese cannon, cast in the 15th century with the royal arms of Spain on its barrel.
Because it's had an interesting history. So Spain, Portugal, Burma.
And it came to Edinburgh in 1886. And people just sit on it. But I suppose if it's a cannon that was designed to fire, it's not going to do any harm to sit on it, is it?
No, it seems to be a genuine one. Yeah. But also there was at one point a pop group who were dancing on this wall here, who were in a video.
What can people do to help you best?
Become a member, and ideally, if they become member, then take on some of the jobs that we would like people. We're scaling up. We've developed very fast from being an action group to a friends group to being a conservation trust, and this means having more members, more volunteers, but also more people taking on specific jobs.
And I guess people can just come along and find out if you're doing a litter pick or something, they could join in and just see how they
Yes, absolutely.
feel and if they want to be more
Yes.
involved. So because I'm Edinburgh Outdoors, what I do is I ask everyone, I just like to talk about the outdoors a bit because I like being outside. I've noticed you've done some
really?
interesting things in the past.
Right. I'm a citizen of nowhere. In my
It's funny,
case, it's
isn't it?
Hong Kong, Tokyo, Hokkaido, Beijing, Edinburgh, London.
And are you an outdoors person?
I think it means recharging your batteries, basically. I think that you go out to sort of get a perspective on your life. You know, if you're in front of your computer and you're working away, you can lose perspective and get a bit unbalanced. And you get outside and then you recharge your batteries. And I think in a way, of the experiences that I've had out of doors, one of the ones that I remember is going to the desert for the first time in the northwest of China. And you go into the desert and somehow all the annoying things in your life are left behind. You go into the desert and you have this sort of serenity and peace of mind. So I think this is why the outdoors are important for all of us.
Yeah, I think they are. It's that feeling of escape, isn't it? Look, North Berwick Law's got a whole load of sunshine on it. Look at that.
Yes.
And there's lovely clouds over there as well.
Yeah, so visibility today is very good.
Yeah. And I also ask everybody their favourite place in Edinburgh. Is this your favourite place, or is there somewhere
Well,
else?
maybe I should say it's my favourite, but I also like After Seat.
Yes.
After Seat is terrific, and together they go together in some ways. They're part of the same SSSI, Site of Special Scientific Interest, so they are linked.
Well, Simon, thank you very much for your time today and for showing me around Calton Hill and looking at the views. Freezing in this wind, but it's a very beautiful day. And thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, and thank you for a very interesting conversation.
If you've enjoyed the Edinburgh Outdoors podcast, please rate us on your podcast app and leave a review. And don't forget to tell your friends and colleagues about it too. If you know of an outdoor space in or around Edinburgh that might like to be featured, you can get in touch by email, Instagram or TikTok.